All right, I'd like to call this meeting of April 12th, 2023 to order. Today's meeting is a combined study session and regular meeting occurring in a single board meeting. We're adjusting our schedule this month to respect religious observances, as well as the Columbine Day of Service occurring next week. We'll resume our typical board schedule in May. I'd like to thank our live simultaneous Spanish interpreters for joining us this afternoon. And as always, we live stream our study sessions and regular board meetings. Roll call, please, Ms. Savada.
Ms. Miller? Ms. Parker?
Here.
Ms. Reed?
Here.
Ms. Schooley?
Here.
Dr. Varda?
All right, the first portion of our study session this afternoon is reserved for the board to look at the 2023-2024 proposed budget. Board members have been receiving information and updates on the development of the 23-24 budget for several months in individual meetings with our CFO, Ms. Brenna Kuplin. Tonight's public presentation will be followed by a presentation in May and a vote by this board at our June 22nd, 2023 meeting. It's important to note that the School Finance Act is still under review by the Colorado Legislature, and therefore Jeffco's funding for next school year is still not finalized. Before I hand this over to Mr. Salmons and Mr. Weiss, Superintendent Dorland, is there anything you would like to add?
I'd like to just reiterate and build on your comment, President Schooley, about the state legislature not being finalized with the School Finance Act, which will have an impact one way or another on our revenue as a district and may change some of our approach to our final budget. There is some information in tonight's presentation that outlines some of the moving parts at the state level that we can talk further about. But in the meantime, as you know, we start our budgeting process in late December, early January with school budgets, department budgets, and we are through a lot of that work and very excited to present to you our current state and our best projections for the fiscal year 24 budget. And I want to just acknowledge that Ms. Copeland is not here this evening. She's taking some time off. And we are very grateful to our Director of Budget for Brian Salmons and for Mr. Dave Weiss, who's also with us this evening as our Chief of Schools. So thank you, Mr. Salmons. Thank you, Mr. Weiss. And we will let you begin.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Dave Wise and myself will be providing an update, as Tracy just said, on the 23-24 budget. We're going to be reviewing the current enrollment trends and the upcoming school year revenue forecast. And then we're also going to be sharing a few snapshots of schools' budgets and a high-level review of departmental budget trends. All right, our budget calendar that we show almost every single time. We're in April, as you know. We're here to provide the estimate of budget trends for the revenue and expenses. Please note that in May, the proposed budget will be presented to you with a vote for adoption in June. After the May proposed budget presentation, there'll be other opportunities for you to ask questions and have conversations about the budget with committees and staff. All right, so the next few slides, we're going to be covering the enrollment trends that are shaping our district. We have shown a previous version of this slide back in November. This graph has been updated to show the forecasted enrollment for school year 23-24. Currently, the pattern we are seeing is Jeffco is graduating around 6,000 students per year, and the K-8 enrollment count for the district schools is averaging around 4,500 students. The high school grade enrollment will start to decline next year as the smaller grades are matriculating into the high schools until reaching around 5,000 students. I do want to point out that from 8th grade to 9th grade, the district sees an entry point and an increase of enrollment of around 500 students, which we will continue seeing in the out years.
Mr. Salmons, can I emphasize one more thing on this real quick?
Please.
I just want to also note the difference between the yellow bar in kinder this year at about 4,500, right? Mm-hmm. Am I saying that correctly? And the yellow bar in 12th grade this year at about 6,200. That's the difference between the number of students who are leaving us as they cross that graduation stage, which we're all excited about next month, and the incoming number of students. And so it's just, I think, a really clear picture of some of the enrollment patterns and trends that we're dealing with in Jeffco, and I wanted to highlight that for board members. Thank you.
Thank you. The district membership, which is the actual number of students in our building, is forecasted for school year 23-24 to be just under 64,000 students. The district membership count would continue to decline around 1,000 students a year for the next 4 to 5 years as smaller grades matriculate through the high schools, as Tracy just mentioned. Charter school membership has been fairly consistent over the past 4 years, and we don't have a genuine projection for their enrollment in the upcoming years, so we have held them constant during the forecasting process. The conversion of membership to funded count process adjusts the membership count to a full-time equivalent count to adjust for any part-time students. Since the funded count for pupil count is determined by the 5-year average, the district received an increase of just under 4,000 students. In FY 22-23, district-run schools' total funded count was around 70,500. This amount did include ECE counts that were included in the total program. Starting in 23-24, ECE FTEs will not be counted towards the funded count and instead will be funded through the newly created Department of Early Childhood. This change does not impact Jeffco's general fund revenue as early childhood funding already flows directly into that fund. As we have discussed before, the 22-23 at-risk count was an anomaly due to the NSLP providing a one-time provision that the FRL October count would include 3 years' worth of previously and currently eligible students. Understanding that the FY23 count was high due to this provision, the forecasts in FY24, we used the November actual K-12 count and applied a 5% increase to the account for any rollover of previously eligible students. This produced a FRL percentage of 28%, which is in line with historical trends of the district. Okay, so now that we have reviewed the enrollment trends of the district, we're going to now cover the revenue projections. Okay, so this is the unknowns for next year's funding that Tracy just mentioned earlier. I know you're going to receive the legislative updates later today, but as with the completion of this presentation, the School Finance Act has not been finalized, but there are 2 potential changes to the school funding formula that could adversely impact the 23-24 revenue. One of these is reducing the multi-year average from 5 years to 4 years. Which would decrease next year's revenue around $13 million and $37 million over the next 4 years. Also, there's been talks about decreasing the cost of living factor and putting it elsewhere in the formula. We estimate that up to 50% of this funding could be lost if deployed through the formula factors other than COLA. Okay. So the district is forecasting a per pupil amount of $10,196 for next school year. This is a 9.1% increase from prior year. This increase is due to the expected inflation adjustment of 8%, a budget stabilization factor buy down of $120 million statewide, and the downward impact of the decline in at-risk enrollment. This 9.1% increase to PPR will produce only a 5.9% increase in total program revenue after factoring in the decline of FTEs of student enrollment of 2,777 in the funded count. In addition to total program funding provided by the Public School Finance Act, Colorado school districts may receive state funding to pay for specific programs designed to serve particular groups of students or particular student needs. Such programs are often called categoricals. We are forecasting that categoricals that Jeffco will receive in total will be increasing 6.1% next year. Legislator has proposed investing the full dollar amount into the exceptional children categorical. Mill levy revenue is projected to increase only 1.6% next year due to Jeffco only having one mill levy that adjusts with inflation, and all other mills are fixed dollar amounts that never increase over time. As you can see from the graph here of the interest and miscellaneous revenue, a year ago interest rates were just above zero, and throughout the past year have risen to just under 5%. They may go over 5% in the next few weeks. This is why we have increased the interest net of fees revenue to $9 million in the revised budget that we came in January. In FY24, we are projecting this to increase to $11.4 million because of the interest rates that are currently set. The rest of the miscellaneous income will remain flat in next year. Okay, so pulling this all together, the district forecasts a $46 million increase to the total program, which is a 5.4% increase from FY22-23 revised budget. Okay, so there's been a lot of talk at the state level over the last few years of changing the funded count average. So we wanted to show you guys how this is represented in our total program and our total funding. If the state moves to a 4-year funded count average from the current 5-year funded count average, the district revenue will decrease $12.8 million. In this scenario, the year-over-year revenue increase goes from 5.4% to 3.9%. The cost of living factor in the School Finance Act helps increase the per pupil funding allocation to account for the differences in cost of living, such as houses, goods, and services among each of the 178 school districts in the state. Cost differences are reviewed every 2 years, and the most current review had Jeffco Public Schools ranked 25th in the state for the cost of living. The district estimates that we will lose up to 50 cents of the dollar when funding is removed from this factor and deployed through other formula factors. For transparency purposes, we have included a crosswalk from the state's estimated $786 million estimate in total program funding to our estimate district funding of $687 million. It's in the appendix of this presentation. We also provided a link in the presentation that takes you directly to where the state is showing their funding amounts for us. All right. In the expense section, we will show a high-level trends for both schools and departmental budgets. Okay, so we wanted to remind everyone of the district's 10-10-10 plan to reduce budgeted spend in 23-24. The 10-10-10 plan is comprised of $10 million reduction in school budget allocations, $10 million reduction in departmental budgets, and a $10 million one-time deferral in capital reserve transfer. So I'm going to pass it over to Dave to talk through the school base budget trends.
Thank you. We wanted to take a few moments to just share with you the impacts directly to schools and the impacts that school budgets have had on the overall 10-10-10 plan. And so we're going to jump right in first to just the school budget allocations. After adjusting for compensation increases, the school budget allocations are $11.4 million lower than our current year, 2.4% reduction due to efficiencies through school consolidation and overall enrollment declines. And this $5 million of this was met from elementary schools, primarily through the consolidation project. And then about $6.4 million are at all other levels, and it's a true up through the enrollment declines across the district on a year-over-year basis. Our 10-10-10 plan targeted a $10 million reduction at schools. We actually ended up with an $11.4 million reduction at schools. On this slide here, we're sharing with you how that has impacted FTE and salary positions at buildings, efficiencies possible through school consolidation have supported reductions to our budget for salary positions with a combination of an overall impact of enrollment changes. The number of budgeted salary positions decreased by about 4%, This slide represents all FTEs within the general fund and Title I. So any FTE or salaried positions. So these are not hourly positions, these are salaried positions. And we saw 181 FTE reductions overall across our schools as a part of this reduction. I'd like to also note here, though, that through the consolidation project, we did displace several teachers. All non-probationary teachers have been placed as of last week. We were able to lift the hiring freeze, which is great news. So I do want people to know that when you see that number, it represents that many fewer FTE in next year's budget. However, we were able to capture all of our people into classrooms. Yeah. Similarly, on this slide, we're looking at hourly positions here, and we saw a 3% decrease in hourly positions. As you look at this slide, these numbers are in thousands. We had an overall decrease of $771,000 in hourly positions. A little more than half of that is actually made up in site-based positions such as clinic aides, because with 15 fewer schools, we have 15 fewer clinic aides, as one example. And so about more than half of that is made up there. Middle and high school, we do have some October count trips as well. And we're going to share with you some ratios in the next couple of slides in terms of how this impacts students directly. Okay, so school budget staffing ratios, we thought it was important to just share with you as we talk about how students are impacted directly by these changes. Even with the budget reductions, we still maintain a strong programming ratio with low student to teacher ratios. I also want to point out that over the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about leadership and support. That's not just administrators, that's also school-based office staff, business managers, principal secretaries, financial secretaries who support schools. But as you can see here in elementary, we're maintaining a ratio of 18.4 students per teacher. In middle school is 21.7, and in high school is 21.4. So it's important to just note that while we made those reductions, we still are maintaining really strong classroom to student ratios, student to teacher ratios. And then para hours as well are on this sheet. And you can see we have a much higher ratio at elementary, which is typical. And then in middle and high school, those are comparable to where we are currently. All right, we also thought it would be important to pop out some schools for you. We have the ability to pull this information on all schools, but we picked 2 elementaries, 1 middle, and 1 high school to just share with you so you can see the impacts of the new SPB model and then the impacts of the budget on these schools. The first one we picked was Stevens because it's a receiving school. It's also a Title I school, so we thought it would be relevant for you all to see a receiving school. Stevens is projected to be up 152 students from this current year. And we're actually seeing in enrolled Jeffco that they're coming in right around that number. And so at 435 students, for them, that represents a large budgetary increase of about $1.3 million overall. And then you can see through the pie graph how they've chosen to spend that money. Teachers, non-instructional direct FTE, which in this case is our AMP instructional coaches, DTLs, psychologists, social workers, and counselors. And then you have leadership and support, which again is administrators and office support staff. And then we have annual para hours there as well, 22.1 hours per student. So this is one school. We're going to go into another school here, Stony Creek, which is not a receiving school, not a Title I school. But we felt like this was a good example to share with you because Stony Creek is actually seeing an 11 student drop in enrollment. But with the new SPB model, what we are seeing is they're actually seeing an increase in funding. Please note it's not a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of $100,000 is 1 FTE because purchasing power is impacted by compensation increases and whatnot. But the school itself is actually expecting an enrollment decline of 11 students, but still are going to see an increase in their funding for their purchasing power to support their students. And so, and at Stony Creek, you're going to see a student to teacher ratio of 17.8, and then our non-direct and leadership and support ratios are there at 152, and then our para support is at 20.7 hours. So there's just 2 elementary schools, 1 receiving and 1 not receiving. Next, we want to share middle school. We have Oberon Middle School here for you. Oberon is also not a Title I school. It's about 19.5% FRL. Currently in enrolled Jeffco, Oberon is showing to be basically about where they are, not much of an increase or decrease, maybe a 5-student decrease. That's still represented an increase in their budget overall of $167,000. And that's allowed them to maintain a ratio of 21.2, which in the middle schools, a lot of times we talk about ratios more in the number of students per teacher by like under 150, but we thought it would be important to just lift up. In our typical classroom, we'd have 21.2 students per teacher in that model. And then we have, again, the ratios of non-direct instructional FTE and leadership and support, and then annual pair hours of around 7.8, which is about average for what we have for the district. And then a high school, we chose Bear Creek High School. Bear Creek, we felt like was a pretty good example because Bear Creek does see a benefit because of the at-risk changes that we made around SBB. So Bear Creek is about 41% FRL. Their enrollment is actually expected to decline by about 60 students, 65 students it shows there. But because of the changes in the at-risk ratio, their funding actually will increase. And so they'll actually see an increase in their funding overall compared to this year. And that's actually going to benefit them by keeping their student-teacher ratio low as well and getting additional support for students around psychologists, social workers, counselors, and things like that. And so, again, we felt it would be good for you to see some schools. We do have the ability to pull this on all schools. We're not going to do that in this meeting, but if you'd like to see other schools, we can pop those out for you so you can see the impacts directly. So those are just the school impacts, both on the 10-10-10 plan and as well as the impacts on the SBB model to the schools. So we just wanted to share some examples for you. And I'm going to pass it back to Brian to take us through departmental.
Thank you, Dave. All right, so the departmental budget allocations. As you've all heard, we had the stop, start, continue departmental budgeting process started this year. This process was able to identify a net reduction of $7.8 million in total departmental general fund budget. This represents a decrease of 2.3% from the FY 22-23 revised budget. I do want to mention here that we do have some non-SBB funded schools that we do include as a departmental roll-ups. So I just want to make sure those are called out a few times through the next few slides. Within the identification of the efficiencies possible through the school consolidations and additional changes to departmental programs, budgeted number of salary positions is declining 2.1% year over year, with the majority of these positions being currently vacant. When comparing the year-over-year reduction in budget allocations for both schools and departments for FY 23-24, the reduction is on average 2.4%. The general fund transfer to the capital reserve fund that was part of the 10-10-10 plan originally was planned for deferral of $10 million in the capital transfer from the general fund. Due to the pace and timing of projects and the temporary increase in interest revenue, this potential deferral amount has now been decreased to $7 million. Please note that the proceeds from sales or lease of vacant buildings must go to the capital reserve fund and can replace the general fund transfer in any year they occur. And the plan is to pay back the deferral in 25 and in 26. Okay, so a summary of the information. In FY 22-23, we have a budgeted drawn fund balance of $32.5 million. The actual trends are showing that revenue is coming in very close to projections, and expenses are coming in at about 0.5 to 1% below the budget overall. There are certain non-personnel expenses that are trending over budget, such as utilities and risk management. These are costs we really can't control. We're just charged what we were charged for those. For FY 23-24, Jeffco is on track to reduce $20 million in reoccurring budgeted expenses and have revised the budget transfer deferral, the capital transfer deferral to $7 million. Okay, so that is the end of our budget trends and review. If you have any questions, please let us know.
All right, thank you both very much. Board members, is there anyone that would like to open up questions, comments, anything we would like to ask of our friends? Yep, Director Reed.
Okay, thank you very much for all of that. Just a couple of quick questions. So these changes, we've heard that the governor is looking to reduce the budget stabilization factor and perhaps eliminate it completely over the next couple of years. But if we make these changes to the School Finance Act, does that essentially nullify or even leave us behind?
So within our current forecast, we are projecting a $120 million buy down this year in the negative factor or budget stabilization factor. And so any additional buy downs would be additional revenue for the school district. That is owed to us.
I'm going to add.
Yeah, please do.
Thank you, Mr. Samus. Did you want to keep going? I thought you were done. I'm going to add an if. Okay. So the latest information that we have is that the legislature is considering increasing the budget stabilization factor buy down from the governor's proposal of $120 million to $180 million. So by $60 million. Given all the various moving parts, an increase of $60 million to the buy down of the negative factor would increase our revenue by about $4.5 million more. The 120 is about $10.5 million, and that's noted on your one pager that you have at the bottom. And if it's at 180, it goes to about $14.5 million in terms of the overall benefit to our revenue.
But if they do those changes so that they're
So can you go back to
basing
that
it on
slide, Mr.
4
Sanders,
years
on
instead of
the
5,
possible changes? Yeah.
that's what I'm
There
wondering.
are two things going on at the state level right now. One is the possibility of conversation where legislators are considering moving money out of the COLA factor, which supports districts that have a higher cost of living, like Jeffco. In fact, just as an example, the average sold price of a single-family home in Jeffco in 2017 was about $451,000. The average price of a single-family home in Jeffco in 2022 was $732,000. So the COLA factor is real for us, and we get about 121 million overall in the COLA factor. There's conversation about taking about 3% out of the COLA and putting it into either the needs of rural districts, which are real, by the way, rural districts do need support, or putting it into the at-risk factor, which is what we've listed on some of your slides here. If it goes into another factor, we get a portion of it back in that factor. So if it goes into at-risk, it's a complicated formula, but it's maybe up to 50% that we would get back. If it goes to the rurals, we would get nothing back. And so it would be basically a move on the legislature's part to buy down the negative factor on the backs of front range districts so that our benefit of the increase in the buy down of the negative factor is basically nothing.
That was my concern.
And it's a very good concern. I'm glad you raised it, Ms. Reed.
Okay.
So Mr. Bowditch is here, and you'll have an opportunity to talk to him a little bit further. You know that I sent a letter to our delegation last week with concerns about this and the impact of Jeffco and not seeing the benefit of a buy down of the negative factor, which is funding that we deserve and have needed for over 15 years that we haven't had. And now post-pandemic, they're talking about taking it down, buying it down, and us not seeing any of the benefit of the state doing that. So we can talk more about that with Mr. Bowditch. We wanted to make sure it was highlighted for you and for our listening audience because we have done an incredible amount of work to make sense for ourselves as district leaders, our board, and our association partners about this model and the potential revenue increases of the governor's proposal. For the legislature to now, at the 11th hour, be talking about making adjustments to a formula that was built in 1994, I might get that year wrong, Ed will tell us, and is that old, is arbitrary. And frankly, just to make one adjustment to one factor without taking a look at the whole thing and giving us a runway and opportunity for conversation about how that will impact our local communities is inappropriate and arbitrary on our state legislature's part. So we are talking with our folks down at the state now, and we'll continue to do so, and happy to have support of the board and further conversation about that when Mr. Bowditch comes.
It seems to me that the BS factor is unpopular across the state and in bipartisan ways. It looks very nice for the governor to reduce that and then just figure out how to not really do it. So that's what I was afraid was going on. Not happy about that. So my next question may be harder to answer because there are so many things that are still kind of up in the air and we're trying to figure it out. But I am curious when we anticipate leveling out and balancing our budget again. At what point do we balance out the deficit that we agreed to and get back to that balanced budget?
Great question. We would have to go through School Finance Act, of course, being understanding what that's going to be, understanding what proposals will be in the future, right? To understand what the buy downs will be in the future from the governor. Also, understanding negotiations are still happening right now. So, not knowing what those are, it's kind of hard to have an understanding of where we will be with the balanced budget that will be proposed.
I can add. I mean, I think our enrollment will continue. We're estimating, and all of this is a projection, but we are estimating that our enrollment may begin to level set in 3 to 5 years. And so as long as we have the averaging benefit, it will help us provide a runway to level setting our budget. And so, if Brenna were here, I think she and I have talked about a 2 to 3 year horizon to get to a place where we are operating within our means. And so many variables impact that, to Mr. Salmon's point. What revenue we might get at the state level. Part of the conversation at the state level around the BS factor is if they buy it down completely, they're worried that they may put us into a situation where they just have to bring it right back the next year. And so I'm in support of them buying it down quite a bit, but taking another year, which is the governor's proposal, to sort of see what happens with the economy and the state's revenue before buying it down completely. But some of that matters, right? And then, of course, decisions that we make in terms of our expenditures matters. And some of those expenditures we obviously have control over, but some of them, like utilities and other set, expenditures, we don't. And so we're hopeful that the enrollment starts to level off in the next 2 to 5 years. As we see this lower enrollment move up through the higher grade levels and our incoming kinders more closely match our graduating seniors. But that will take a few more years, we believe.
Questions, Director Reed? All right, is there anyone else that has questions they would like to ask? Or I can. Director Parker? No, that's okay. No, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciated the presentation of the different schools and how it affected them, elementary, middle school, and high school. Do we have some schools that were affected the other way, that significantly lost funding and therefore FTE and staff?
Off the top of my head, I can't recognize and say certain ones. I mean, there's always people who, gain and making sure we have the right decisions in there. So again, all this becomes a decision within the principal. So something else, if you look through the snapshots again, you can kind of see what the decision the principals were making through there, right? They might have a decision to say, okay, I'd rather have more teachers in the building. I'd rather have more counselors in the building. You can kind of see that with the budgets that they're building in there. So some of those ratios might be different because the decisions that are made within the building themselves, not necessarily the difference in funding. And so that's what we're kind of hoping, if you look through those again, try to look at those and see what the different schools are doing.
Yep. Can I add to that? So we do have some schools that did have that didn't have as much benefit as we showed up here, but primarily they were middle school. And part of what we have shared with you previously is the enrollment declines are hitting the middle schools pretty hard right now. And that started 2 years ago when we were really offsetting some of those hits when we were in the pandemic and the year after. And so those enrollment declines did hit the middle schools. And so some of them did see less money. However, that's more related to their enrollment decline than it is to the SPV changes. However, we did try to level off, if you recall, the size equity factor involved in the SPV changes. And so we had some smaller schools that were really benefiting pretty significantly, and some larger schools that were getting hit pretty hard with the size equity factor, and we tried to level some of that off. And so as a result, some of those schools did see less funding, but a lot more of that change was related to the enrollment decline than it was just the algorithm of the SPB.
And where we do have schools that had an impact on staffing that was hard to absorb in 1 year, given enrollment declines, and maybe partly because of the SBB revisions, even though the majority of schools that are having big hits to staffing have to do with enrollment declines. Mr. Weiss and his team, the community superintendents, have worked together to allocate some funding for FTE to ease into new enrollment realities in some of our schools, where there were some difficulties at the reductions that needed to be made.
Thank you. That helps. I know previously we had that size equity adjustment, so I got familiar with that. I'm wondering if you anticipate going forward that we'll find some adjustments that we'll need to do. It could be in response to enrollment declines, or if there's any other things we're looking at to prevent schools from going into severe cuts.
I mean, I would anticipate this year is probably going to be one of the tougher years just in terms of the adjustment because we made the changes to the SBB model. The size equity factor still exists. It didn't entirely go away. It's just more equitable than it was before. And I think we are, we're working with high schools to be prepared because we do think we believe these enrollment declines are going to continue to go up through the system. We do see some students returning back to our high schools from out of district or charters. So our enrollment changes may not be as dramatic at high school as they are in elementary and middle. But at the moment, I don't know that I feel pretty good about the SBB model, and I think it's the right model. And people that have used it this year are going to be prepared going into next year to think about how their enrollment's going to impact things. But a lot of truing up is happening right now that maybe should have been happening over the last 2 years and just wasn't. And so I'd say we're doing more catch up right now than we will be in future years. Does that make sense?
I just think that the slides are difficult to understand because the examples you gave show declining enrollment and increased revenue.
Mm-hmm.
When any experience I've had visiting a school now that has declined enrollment has huge cuts and like you described.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think the slides don't represent the majority of the, I don't know what the proportion is. Like I wrote down, well, how many schools are not, there's just so many schools right now that you walk in and they're like, we're declining and we've had to cut our budgets. All that makes sense. But here in our board meeting, we're seeing slides that show declined enrollment and increased budgets as the only examples.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a little misleading about the reality of what's happening in our schools. And if I were in a school in that situation, I'd say, where am I?
Sure.
Slides.
So an increase in their budget doesn't necessarily mean that they have the same amount of staffing, for example. Purchasing power is not the same as it was before. But I would say actually that, we've narrowed it down to about 10 to 12 schools that saw relatively hard hits. And those are the schools that we're, pouring some additional funds into to support. Most of our schools, I would actually say that does represent a pretty good number of our schools, even though they were 4 of them that we shared. A lot of them are experiencing a similar outcome in their budgets. However, the enrollment declines are real. So even though you may see an increase in funding, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are able to purchase more staff per se. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio because those costs are also going up. And so you're correct. We did share examples where the budgets were increased in part because we wanted to highlight the increased equity in the model because in the previous model, some of those schools were actually hurt by the SBB. And so we're leveraging, I think, or leveling out in the system.
What I'm wondering, because I have had some similar wonderings when I was reading through this and looking at how it does feel like we are in this transition moment of enrollment making its way through our system,
Mm-hmm.
and then some of the changes district-wide systemically around SBB, Title I funding, et cetera. I think what would be helpful as a board, especially during this time, is to have some sort of update, and I don't know what it looks like, so if we just sort of turn that over, just to keep us informed of like,
Sure.
where are some of those spaces where it doesn't look like that,
Mm-hmm.
and I understood the why behind some of those slides because it's different factors that are
Mm-hmm.
impacting those schools in
Yep.
various ways. just so that we are well informed, especially as we're going into schools, and the narratives are very different. I mean, we hear there's different stories and different things that are kind of hitting harder, or boons that are happening for different schools. So some way to kind of provide an update for the board to be able to see those areas so that we can ask questions and make sure that we're really informed as we go into, and can help advocate if that's the appropriate role to play.
Yep. We'd be happy to do that for you. And I think that, we can provide that at another time, but we'd be happy to do that for you. We can also share where we've actually added some additional supports to make sure that some of these schools have a bit of a safety net in terms of the impacts. And, I think it's also acknowledging that over the last couple of years, we've maintained positions while the enrollment has dropped. And so we've maintained our positions in the district, and we've got far fewer students. And so some of those impacts are real. That's absolutely true. And they're also needed because of our enrollment declines overall.
I appreciate that. I think that's helpful. And especially coming from with the combination of school closures as well, and the enrollment period being, it's just, a moving target, and which it will be, right, until the first day of school and after. But just to be able to have points in time when we can check in and be like, okay, how is this looking moving forward? It's hard to kind of wrap the head, because there's so many changes that went into the system all at once.
Yep. And then another thing I would add really quick is, our principals were very thoughtful about where any of those cuts were happening, and they tried very hard to stay away from classrooms. And so where we did see some of the impacts were outside the classroom. But there are some schools that did have to make classroom adjustments as well. So just wanted to share that in addition.
Just a couple of things to add. Thank you, Mr. Weiss, for all of that. And I do think it's fair for the board to be like, well, what about the schools that don't see an increase in funding, even if they're having a decline? That's not what I'm hearing in a school when I talk to people on the ground. So we'll do some thinking about how to get you all an update that highlights some of those challenging areas too, and how Mr. Weiss and his team are working to support people. I think this point that Mr. Weiss is making about our enrollment has been declining for 5 or more years, and we've not been doing the right sizing work that we've needed to do. And with the consolidations, we are realizing the estimated $12 million in annual reduced expenditures that we anticipated and projected. So that's good news. And I think, Mr. Sammons, if you can go to slide number 25 to put some of this in perspective at a big picture level, you'll see that after adjusting for compensation increases, which we hold schools harmless for, the school budget allocations are about $11.4 million lower than the current year, which is a 2.4% reduction in expenditures. And much of that is due to efficiencies through school consolidations and the fact that we're truing up to this enrollment, which we have to do, as evidenced by our deficit budget, right? And you'll see also on this slide on the green bar, the 23-24 SBB total cost. And so it's $464.7 million. And there's 11 million less than last year. So what I think is part of the issue is that we have also supported staffing levels that are not aligned to our enrollment reality through our first round and second round of ESSER funds, like many districts did. Those 2 rounds have been expensed and reconciled, and they no longer are a resource for us. And we have, per your direction and the previous board's direction, organized our ESSER 3 funds to support additional learning experiences and wraparound services and all of the things for students as we return and get back to it right after the pandemic. And so we don't have those additional one-time funds anymore to support some of the staffing, which is some of the impact that I believe you're hearing about at schools as well. And when you are in the midst of it, and it's your colleague down the hall or your colleague who comes in and supports your classroom, it always doesn't feel good, whether it's aligning to our enrollment realities or not. And so I'm not surprised that you all are hearing about reductions that are having to be made in our schools, because the closer you are to the work on the ground, the harder it is to understand and accept that those reductions need to be made in the interest of our contracting enrollment and our revenue realities. And so we're happy to think about putting some information together and getting it to you. And even as we come back in May and do some budget presenting to you in your formal setting and for our public, bringing some of that into the conversation as well, if that's of interest to the board.
Can I just follow up on that point? Over the past 5 years, we have lost over 8,000 kiddos, and that is an articulation plus. And I think it would be helpful, because we have done this right sizing in schools, understanding really what our threshold is for utilization levels for our schools where they are financially viable. So, for example, if we know that an elementary school really can be viable at 75 or 80% utilization levels, where we know the revenue that is coming through the door with those students supports the thriving environment that we've been talking about, that we've built into our brains about what we want for kids, then I think we need to know what that is. And I think the same thing for a middle school and the same thing for a high school, because I know we can't shift staff around because we lose children in different locations. And so it's not as you've always said, Superintendent Dorland, it's not a 1-for-1, or it's not a 21 children for one teacher, because of the way the enrollments. But it would be helpful, I think, for this board and for future boards to really understand what it takes to truly finance a building, so that we have a greater ability to support your work as leaders of the district, and understand what that financial viability is per building. Because I do hear what Director Varda has said, and what President Schooley have said, is we hear we're losing kiddos. And I'll give Bear Creek as an example, because I walked Bear Creek last week and talked with the principal, and they're losing a mental health person for grant. But they've got an increase in dollars for their budget, and they're using it to spend the way they, as you said, Mr. Weiss, the way they see fit. So although I was shocked, oh gosh, that's horrible, we're losing a mental health, but wait a minute, what are you investing in on the other side? So being able to understand would be helpful in that space. I do think that we're going to see, like you said, another loss of students. And so over an 8-year period, if we're down 15,000 kids, or whatever that number is, that's 2 or 3 articulation areas, depending. So the more we have as a board to understand what really it costs would be helpful in that space.
Yep. And I think when people are it's emotional when you have to let people go. That's a difficult time. And anytime you're doing that, I think when you're in that moment, and especially if you catch somebody when they're in that moment, it's not always going to be, rainbows and roses. But I do want you to know that as we deliver budgets to schools, principals spend time with their community superintendent and their budget analyst, a lot of time looking at those budgets closely. They look at their current staffing list, they look at their enrollment, they look at the programmatic needs of the building, and they make decisions. And that's one of the things we trust our principals to do, is to make the decisions around their budget. That's what an SBB model is partly about, is to give them the authority to make those decisions at their building based on what they know the needs are. And it's important that we incorporate the feedback from our staff and from our community. It's also important that our principals incorporate the data they have at their school level to help them make decisions about what to do with those funds. And that's, those can be difficult conversations when they're with their accountability committee or whether they're with their staff. And so please know that we know that these aren't necessarily easy times, and I'm sorry if it felt misleading with those slides. That was not the intent. We were just trying to show how the model itself had a differentiating impact. But that said, there are schools that were hit. In general, as an organization, we were hit. We have far fewer kids, and so at the end of the day, we had to make some tough decisions. And so if you caught people during that budgeting season, it's not something that's always as rewarding. And so just wanted to point out that some of you may have caught people at a time when they were making some tough decisions. That being said, they were heavily supported by our budget analysts, by our community superintendents, and they we're engaged in a lot of conversations with their staff, their community, and using data to make those decisions they have to make.
And I just want to say thank you for bringing up Bear Creek, because it was one of the schools that we highlighted. And sometimes what happens is a school might be not necessarily sort of losing a lot of things, but because I believe the SBB model allows for that just right balance of school-based autonomy and systemness, therefore allowing principals and their SACs and teacher leadership teams to make some decisions, there may be just a shift in funding, right? And there may be people even within that most local school community who are struggling and saying, I don't think that's the right shift to make, right? And I know our principals are having conversations and listening to their constituents about what we need to invest in, but not always do people agree on everything, as we know. And so I do think there's some of this, like, people are making decisions, our leaders, with their communities and their teachers about where to invest the dollars. And so even when we have a school that might be getting a little bit of a gain based on some of the changes, there still may be some challenges with what they're able to continue to do. And so we'll take some next steps. And I appreciate you saying you're sorry. You didn't mean for the slides to be misleading. That definitely was not our intent. And so we'll follow up with some information to make sure that the board feels like it's getting a full picture of what's going on in our schools. Thanks.
Just in that follow-up, I'm assuming that these impacts are different around the different parts of the district. And I'm wondering if that's something else you could bring to us to show where the impacts are different. Meaning, and I'm most curious, is it hitting like one area or two areas more than others? For example, are some areas of the district experiencing more declining enrollment than others? I don't know. So I'm just curious if we can look at these kinds of things by not only in a more, like, I think, when you said the slides were meant to show the deviations or differences, sorry, I can't remember the word that you used, and it wasn't either of those, but I think that's exactly, I think the slides didn't show that the differences. I think it showed one example. And so when we see that in greater detail, I'm wondering if maybe looking at it by the different parts of the district could be included.
I think we can provide some analysis around that as well. We also know, like, for example, the Ralston Valley area is an example where the enrollment's actually gone up. And so, but generally speaking, across our district, our enrollment declines. We are aware, and I can't recite them all to you right now, but we know where they are heavier than they are in other places. And we've got that data pretty easily handy. I think we can get to you.
Thank you. And I sent a couple questions already, and I didn't see the responses. So when it was on 101, because I didn't see it in 101. Administration, is it? Okay, I'll look. The other question I have is just for the contract for JCEA. My assumption, just so people understand, is that our ratios are still within the JCEA contract. At our different levels of school for primary and secondary, correct? Right.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, okay. And then on page 30, you mentioned the purchasing power of, I think you gave an example with Stony Creek, saying the purchasing power of for teachers. The salaries, the schools don't carry the changes in the teachers' salaries per se, correct? It's more across the district. Is that right? So, for example, let's say I'm a third grade teacher and I've been here for 20 some years and my salary has gone up to X amount of dollars. But as a principal, I'm blind to that, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. It's
right.
on an average. It's based on an average.
Exactly.
Yes.
So my purchasing power really is, what does a third grade teacher's salary cost?
The average cost of a teacher is the same.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Regardless of the position. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that was the case. And then on page 34, when we talk about instructional supports that have we're reducing by about $5.1 million, where are we being impacted? Do we know what instructional supports we're no longer going to be doing, or that we've decided we're going to stop doing because we've changed our curriculum and therefore we have different needs and challenges? my concern is we're rolling out curriculum with the reading, and we're now doing illustrative math. And so I don't want to lose that, and I don't know that we are losing. I want to understand where that instructional reduction is taking place so that Renee's team is able to support our reading programs and the rollout of the math programs, because I know that we have cut that in the past, and we've seen the results of that.
I'd like to get that answer to you. I'd like to get that to you in an update if we could, because I'd like to
Okay.
get a little more detailed answer to you than I can give right now.
Okay, that would be great.
I can jump in on sort of I can jump in.
Okay, that'd be great.
We do have the stop, start, continue process that we've been working through, and each department has been documenting as we go about this process, the stop, start, continue, and monitor items that they have made decisions about. And it's funny to say made decisions because we're still waiting on the state to make some of their decisions so we can make sure our decisions are actually decisions. So in May, I think once we have some more clarity about what's happening at the state and we believe that we're on the right track and everything's sort of moving in the direction we know our revenue will support, we will be publishing those stop, start, continue forms. And so the board will see that as well as our public aligned to transparency. And the majority, I can just say generally, the majority of the reductions in academic departments like student success and teaching and learning were in alignment with school consolidations. And we do not anticipate decreases in services like professional development. Now, is that to say we don't need more in some areas or would appreciate more, putting more funding into some areas to support schools? Absolutely. But really, we've aligned it to 15 fewer schools next year, 16 the year after, and making sure that we're paying attention to that. And I don't know if Dr. Kim, since you're working so closely with Renee and Matt on this, if you'd like to add anything.
No, you're dead on. When we looked at the reduction of 15 schools and we look at staffing and how we allocate that staffing to those schools, honestly, what ends up happening, especially in our hard to fill areas, we've had vacancies and an inability to fill some spots. And so the ability to reduce there without ever impacting any service to schools that exist. And the nice part about teaching and learning, the curriculum adoption that you spoke of, that is a really nice place for ESSER type funds to be utilized. And then we use ongoing budget to support with professional development and coaching and staffing and those kinds of things. So you're not going to see reductions in those areas. It really is what Superintendent Dorland spoke to, which is all around right sizing, staffing, as it is impacted by the number of schools that we've closed.
And in response to that, my assumption is as we move towards a budget where we have, uniform accounts, we're able to really see where we're spending dollars, not only at the district level, but also at the school level. That will help you all, I'm assuming, with how we allocate more thoughtfully. Not more thoughtfully, because I think you guys are doing a great job, but with more information, I guess I should say, with more data that supports that.
Absolutely.
It would tell the story more accurately.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make a point based on what you're sharing, Director Miller, as well as what Dr. Varda shared earlier around regional trends, right? So we've invested in a boundary study. That work is kicking off. I think that's going to help with some of your questions that you both have posed. In addition, as I've shared with you, we are shifting our planning function from facilities, even though they will still be supportive of facility needs that team may have, into our finance team, which will more tightly couple an understanding of enrollment, demographics in certain parts of our community with our financial practices. And that is, in my mind, on my part and Brenna's, a very strategic move so that we can, I think, do a better job of using the data to guide decision-making and answer questions in be more nuanced about areas of town and what we need to do to make sure that we're serving kids in the best way possible and providing the resources where they need to go. So I just want to highlight that organizational shift that we're making is in the interest of some of the questions that you're posing this evening.
Other questions? Okay. I just had I had a couple questions I'm going to save for Mr. Bowditch because I will just pepper you with those questions later around some of the stuff happening at the Capitol. One of the points that I'd love to have some clarification on. So when you mentioned the Department of Early Childhood funding and how that does not kind of get reflected in district budget, can you just talk a little bit about how that works in terms of students, PK students that would be coming to our district, but distinct funding? Can you just talk a little bit about the source of that and how we interact with that agency?
Yes, I can talk about what it's been previously. Going forward, it'll be through UPK. And I know you're going to be a presentation about UPK, I do believe, in a few weeks from now, I think in the May presentation. So they'll be able to better explain how that funding is coming through to the district. But it's not impacting the general fund because all of the ECE FTEs that came in through the total program funding, we took and put immediately into early childhood fund. So it never came into any of the budgetary numbers you see for the general fund. So this shift of having all the students the funding go directly to the ECE fund isn't really impacting any of the numbers that you see from previous year to this year. It's a 1-for-1 because that money's never been in our general fund, essentially.
I think part of what we want to communicate on this slide is that we don't really see a funded count of a true funded count decline of 2,777. It's really more like, I don't remember do the math like in my head, 1,700 because I'm looking for the number, about 1,050 of them are just moving over to a different fund. So we just wanted to clarify that when you see 2,777 students funded less for next year, it's not that we're not getting funded with them. About 1,000 of them are moving over and being funded by the new Department of Early Childhood. And I'm going to ask Brian to correct anything that I might have misrepresented there.
That was very impressive. You got it all right.
Wow, see? Love it when that happens. Thank you.
Thanks. And we'll look forward to that next presentation. I think it's just a little bit confusing when we're looking at where students are being taken from and added in, but sometimes it doesn't impact the budget and it's a little bit confusing in general.
And I understand we try to get the numbers to match exactly what CDE posts on their website. So sometimes it gets a little confusing because we're showing the ECE FTEs in there because you could get to the 70,527 looking at their website. So we try to get everything to top back exactly so we can walk through if there's any questions that we have.
Perfect. All right. Are there any other questions or comments that have come up at this moment in time with the snapshot that we have? All right. Great. Thank you both very much. Much appreciated. And we'll hope that Ms. Copeland is enjoying her time not sitting at that table for tonight. All right. We will move forward with the presentation from Mr. Ed Bowditch to hear about and discuss recent legislative activities of the 74th General Assembly. Should the board wish to formally endorse or support legislation, we can also discuss it during this time. So we will welcome Mr. Bowditch, partner at Bowditch & Castle Public Affairs, up to the front of the room. And thanks for spending your afternoon with us, or at least part of it. Not the whole time, I promise.
While Mr. Bowditch is getting ready and settled, I just want to thank him for the work that he's been doing. He's been on the phone with me, with Ms. Copeland, emailing back and forth with Ms. Tollison on many moving parts. It's a busy season down at the Capitol, and I feel like we have a very strong and competent advocate down there for us. And so thank you, Mr. Bowditch, for everything you do for Jeffco.
And I'll keep getting my stuff ready and keep listening to you if you like that. I think I've been here representing Jeffco for 16 years maybe. And just once, I'd like to come up and say, there are no education bills. We are flush with money. Do you have any questions? But unfortunately, that will not be tonight. On a very much more serious note, it is time to have a serious discussion with our Jeffco legislative delegation. And I didn't know when was the right time. I haven't even talked to the superintendent about this. We've been on the phone three times today, maybe. But now it's time. We need the board members to contact our Jeffco legislators. The budget presentation, frankly, I thought was excellent, that showed what's going on in Jeffco, and then it broke it down with some school examples. I thought that was very well done. And Madam Chair, I apologize. I'm just going to start right in with the most important stuff, if that's okay. In January, the governor revised his budget request to recommend a $120 million reduction in the BS factor. That was good news. We appreciated that. The new proposal is a BS factor buy-down reduction of $180 million. That is great. The governor wanted a 3-year plan to eliminate the BS factor. The legislators involved in school finance said, nope, we're going to do it in 2. That is wonderful news. However, let me turn off my phone. However, the new plan takes a reduction in the cost of living factor and spreads it out among the rural schools. When this was unveiled this morning at 8 o'clock, there were a number of us lobbyists representing most of the large districts, and the lobbyists representing CASE, and the lobbyists representing the rural schools, who objected to this and said, you can't take from one district to give to other districts. I made a point of saying, and this was after talking to the superintendent, that we support the rural schools getting more money. There is no doubt they have a very tough job to do. For the last 7 years, there has been an allocation outside of the formula to the rural schools. It's been a great way for rural schools to buy new buses, buy new technology. They've been giving their staff one-time bonuses, but it's always been one time, and it's been outside the formula. I respect the fact that the legislators want to try and move it into the formula, but at this late date, it just doesn't work. What will happen is the additional $60 million in the BS factor buy-down will not benefit Jeffco schools. So they are buying down the additional BS factor money, and that money is going out the door to the rural schools. What we have said in response is, we think the rural schools need more money, but you have to find it elsewhere. Take it out of the state education fund and keep working. I think at this point, I have started talking to Jeffco legislators because they were hearing about this plan. And the first response I got was, no, they can't do that. So I was pleased with that. But at this point, I think if any of you want to call the legislators that you know in Jeffco and tell them this plan is coming and we object to the reduction in the COLA. We don't object to more money for rural schools, but we object to where they're taking it out from.
And Ed, can you talk a little bit about the scale and the actual reality that is possible in support of rural schools without a huge amount of investment? I don't want to. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's a couple of things just to go over. So I think if I remember correctly, if they reduce the COLA by 3%, we lose about $3.5 million. If they increase the buy down of the BS factor by $600 million, we get roughly $4.5 million. So the net of those is what's going on. They buy down the BS factor by $60 million, and our net, combined with the cost of living factor, our net is about $1 million.
I actually think it's about $817,000.
Yeah. It's in that $1 million range, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but I know that the staff is working on things. But it's just when you say it like that, as I said to one of the Jeffco legislators, we're 9% of the state in terms of students. They're buying it down by $60 million, and we're getting $1 million of that.
And not to mention the fact that we are 152nd out of 184 districts in terms of the amount of the state share that we receive.
So, yeah,
So for years, this has been happening to Jeffco.
we rank low in the per student funding. We are down close to the bottom. This plan would move us even closer to the bottom. We love the fact that they're moving to a 2-year buy down, but we just don't like how they're doing it.
And the
So-
amount of money needed, I mean, as Ed has said, the amount of money needed to support the rurals is important. And we understand that they don't have the economies of scale. And I think this board in particular understands that very well after what you've gone through with small schools. It's the same concept, but at the state level. And so for the state to think about the state ed fund and their fund balance in support of rural schools is doable as an alternative to the 3% reduction in the COLA. And that's another thing we've been sharing with them.
Yes.
Go ahead and do it. We understand the need, but don't do it at the expense of Front Range districts who serve 80 to 90% of the students in the state. And frankly, have some of the highest cost of living increases. Once again, single family home from 17 to 22 in Jeffco has gone from $430,000 to $720 on average. We can't look our teachers and our employees in the face and say, we didn't advocate for the maximum amount of buy down for Jeffco to support them and to support the work that they do.
So can I just ask you a real quick question? This is, I know this is a lot of information, and I know we've gotten the update from you in our email. Is there a way to kind of capsulize this information for bullet points for talking? I think we all have the opportunity to meet with different people in the Jeffco legislative crowd. And so it would be helpful for me if I had some of that detail in bullet form, so that I could kind of rattle it, just as you guys have been, you're living and breathing it every day. And so if I had that same information and I go to a meeting on Saturday, perchance, I'd be able to talk about it that way,
I think
with confidence.
That's a great suggestion.
So that would be helpful for me. I don't know if anybody else would like it, but that would be very helpful for me.
I think it'd be helpful for all of us, and we can help coordinate also with Ms. Spada's help to get contact information and be able to have easy access to do outreach. I think would be very helpful.
And I think it would be helpful for our commissioners to also understand the severity, so that they could be helpful with us in that space too. So that would be another checklist or check item. When you said, Superintendent Dorland, that we were 157th out of 178 or something to that number, do we have that list? I mean, I know I can go on CBE and figure out, by how much money comes into us, but it would be nice if we had that list, also in maybe that bullet point format.
Yeah, I think, Ed, you can provide that for us. Is that possible?
Yes.
Yeah,
I have
and
it.
between the letter I sent last week and this letter we're working on now and some of the updated impacts that Mr. Sammons has helped me understand, we can get you talking points.
That would be lovely. And if we could have them before Saturday, I'm just thinking of a meeting I might go to.
Yes, the School Finance Act is supposed to be introduced into the Senate on Friday,
Okay,
heard in committee on Monday.
okay,
And as of Monday, we will have 3 weeks left in the session. And so this thing, they have to introduce it and start it moving. It doesn't mean it can't be changed. But our legislators are right now hearing about this.
okay.
And so we need to get in touch with them in the next few days and let them know, look, this has a serious impact in Jeffco. And again, if you buy down one of the things I said in today's meeting, that Jeffco has been treated like an ATM in school finance. And a number of districts have been in that position. We've had very high mill levies. Our total program mill was almost at 27, which meant our taxpayers were paying almost the maximum amount to support education. And many other districts in the state have benefited from that. And that was no one's fault, but that's just the reality. Well, now that the BS factor is being bought down, you can't divert the money away from Jeffco. That is just not fair. And I tried to be, I think I was respectful in saying that to the legislative sponsors. I hope so. But it's just not fair that they're buying it down by $60 million and our benefit is $1 million.
I think one of the things, because I can't imagine you not being respectful, I feel like at this moment in time, though, like what I mean, we will coordinate to make sure that this board's voice is heard with our Jeffco contingency. But this is bordering on something that, the work that we have done as a district and as a board over the last couple of years, especially in the last year, to really try to take ownership over some really challenging decisions to right size and to get our budget into a place where it's more sustainable. This feels particularly sort of devastating was one word, and then there's another word that I won't use, but because we've been doing the work, it's not we are working to get to that place, and this feels a little bit like a slap in the face of districts that are really trying to dig into that work. And I have a lot of respect for rural districts. I serve on the CASB board of directors and have colleagues that represent rural districts, and those struggles, as Superintendent Dorland said, are very real. And there is work that needs to be done to make sure that our funding model can support those schools without creating really distinct winners and losers. And the rationale behind this and the timing with which this could be impacting our budget and our budget decisions, I think is unconscionable. I feel, so when I said, I know you're always polite, I really hope that this is a moment when, at least for me, I am one person, give you full reign to really make this point very clear to them that this is outrageous on a number of levels. And it's not about us not wanting to be in support of public education statewide. I'm a strong supporter of public education for the state. And that has been happening over the years to the detriment of what we could be doing for Jeffco kids. And there has to be some balance in how we make and how we consider what are the options that we have as a state to address problems that are pervasive and that are not going away anytime soon. It feels like this piggyback ride is getting a little bit exhausting to me. So go be mean. Yeah, Director Reed, sorry.
In addition to the talking points, can we maybe get a list of legislators who may be on the fence or who need stronger pressure than others? I think so that we're not preaching to the choir, we are going where we need to go.
Yes, I can certainly do that. Absolutely.
And also getting the names of the members of the committee that is going to be hearing it.
Yeah.
Basically, any person we can call and reach out to would be awesome. Director Miller?
I think I want to go back to your point earlier that this has been kind of a ongoing issue. And when you look at what the rules have gone through, where, for example, they have large companies that have come into their building or into their area, the assessed value goes up. They get the money that's associated with that assessed value. And then when that company leaves, here they're spending at that level and they have that funding. But then when that group leaves, which has happened with a lot of our rural areas, it goes down to a prior level and there's no way they can recover. And so that's part of the formula as well, right? That we have to figure out a way to have them sustain. And with the commercial residential assessment, the way it's structured. So that's the work the legislature needs to be doing, not a last minute, let's adjust right now. I mean, that's the meat of the work they have to do to fix the structure, not on the backs of our kiddos.
I would like to build on that because something that my superintendent colleagues and I have been talking about is that this formula has been in place since 1995. The budget stabilization factor has been in place for 15 years. So for 15 years, we have not even received the funding that we deserve and that our kids deserve based on a formula that was built almost 30 years ago.
And was built without ever assessing whether or not that was even adequate.
And so I think it is an important talking point to say you need to first fully fund us. And then we are more than happy to come to the table and talk about the realities of what we deal with to support students and families in the best way possible. Because when you think about the last 15 years of not having our full funding and the amount of change and increased responsibility, frankly, that has been put on school districts in technology, needs, software, operational systems that have moved to the cloud, curriculum, unfunded requirements, special
Safety.
education needs, intensity of needs by our most needy students, a pandemic, the expectation that we're not only teaching academics, but supporting big time social emotional learning needs and behavioral needs and mental health needs of our students. And then let's just add safety. Okay? We cannot afford to not advocate to fully fund Jeffco and all districts across the state. And we need to begin advocating that we take a look at the finance formula in the state of Colorado, period, in light of the realities that our school districts are facing and the supports that we need to provide as communities to our kids. And so it's arbitrary and it's nonsensical for them to be having this conversation right now. And Ed has been helpful talking me off many ledges over the last 2 weeks and being our advocate. So.
And I'd just like to say too, and I don't know if this is necessarily a talking point, but I do think it intersects with some of the work being done or considered for legislatively that, these are all inputs into a system that is expecting certain outputs, right? And outcomes for kids. And so as we think about, as Director Reed mentioned, which I think is probably apt, the sort of political pressure around buying down the BS factor that, so you do that and then it's sort of one hand giveth, the other one taketh away. The expectation then that our accountability system is looking for certain things based on all of these inputs, it's not fair may not be the right word to use, but it's not a fair way of assessing what those inputs actually are. Because it's making some assumptions around this additional money that we're getting it doesn't translate that same way, but that's the accountability system it remains the same. And so those conversations, I think, they need to connect, and they need to connect in a way that is a real story that we're telling about what those inputs are and what the expectation for outcomes is. And I'm not sure that that's the conversation that's being had right now. Yes, Director Reed.
I think the other thing that's really alarming about it is that we've understood that the BS factor is supposed to be temporary. This makes all of this permanent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Director Varda?
Well, I just wondered if you could help clarify some of the numbers. Just because, so I understood when you said that the extra buy down, the 60 million is the additional, correct, that's being proposed, and how that comes out to 817,000. I understand that 3% COLA, 3.5 million, and then the 60 million comes out at 4.5 million. But on this slide, it says something about 124 million of our funding based on this one factor, the COLA. And it's like, how does the number 124 million factor into this conversation? I'm wondering, how do we talk about that?
I think that's the amount we get in total from the cost of living factor for our district.
Yes. So the COLA factor generates 124 million, and I think I said earlier about 120 million when I was talking to you in the budget presentation, of revenue in the formula that then dictates Jeffco's revenue. Other districts get different amounts based on where they land in terms of cost of living. So if they remove 3% of that,
We lose 3.5 million of
Yes.
the 124 million?
Yep.
Okay, and then, so I'm just thinking about how to talk about this. So the total BS factor buy down is proposed is 180 million. So if someone were to say, right, but it's a almost a wash, the 817,000. But what about the $120 million other part of the buy down? And how is, won't they say, isn't that benefiting Jeffco? And so your gross is more than 817,000. It's 870,000 plus whatever the $120 million buys down.
but the slides you're looking at that explain that our COLA benefit, the revenue based on the COLA is 124 million for Jeffco, that's assuming $120 million buy down of the negative factor. Because, and this is part of the timing issue. So in December, we have to generate assumptions for our SBBs. and then build them and then get them to schools so that we can hire teachers in February and March and take care of teachers from our schools who are closing and all of those activities that go on in January, February, March, April. So by January, we take the governor's proposal and we make assumptions and projections and build a model. And that's what we reviewed tonight. In the current model that you're seeing, and you have another one-pager that might be helpful for us to look at right now. In this one-pager, you'll see the projected budget on the state share of $377.2, which is a $22.6 million change for next year to the good, which is great. That's assuming a $120 million buy down at the state level. 10.5 of that 22.6 is a benefit of the $120 million buy down. So if they buy down the BS factor by 120 million, Jeffco gets 10.5 million more. That's our share of the 120 million buy down. If they buy down the negative factor, and this is assuming they don't change any of the factors, COLA or anything else. If they buy down by another 60 million to 180, then we get another 4.5 million on that 10.5. You guys with me?
Mm-hmm.
And so then if they adjust the COLA, it basically eats up that 4.5 million, except for about 800 and some, almost a million. So it's like we're getting a wash of the additional buy down.
Right.
So that's the it's not 160 million and 120 million. It's one or the other.
Oh, no, I know.
Okay.
No, I'm anticipating, just to anticipate what we might hear in
They're going to
response.
say, and they have said
they will
to
say-
us, Ed, I mean,
They could say, okay, so in total, you could be getting 15 million. If we take the COLA down 3%, you'll end up with about 11.5 million. I can just see them saying that.
yeah,
back.
they're going to say it's a wash. And our point back is we have not received full funding for 15 years for our kids. And you make this change, and to Paula's point just now, it doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the averaging being adjusted, where once we catch up, we no longer see that benefit. This is $4.5 million forever and ever and ever. And frankly, when you want to think about $4.5 million, what you could say, well, why are we arguing about $4 million when we have a, this big of a budget? It's over time that it adds up. And think about the hard work that we have done with our community to close 16 schools. And how much have we realized in savings over time? 12 million. Right? It's not easy for us to just right set our budget. Plus, we have to be competitive in the marketplace with salaries. We have increased housing costs. And if we're realizing 12 million ongoing by closing 16 schools and all that incredible work that we did that was so hard for us in our communities, this is eating up a third of that realized savings if they make this change to the COLA. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can frame it in different ways, but the argument that it's a wash, well, we're doing this so that you don't have the impact. We're raising the buy down to offset your impact is really frustrating when they're not also acknowledging the fact that for 15 years, we haven't realized or received our full funding. Mm-hmm. And we have been asked to do more and more and more for our families, and we want to, and we have, and not getting paid to do it and getting the funding we need to do it well. So I do think, though, that that's a good thing to think.
I'm just saying, like, when we approach a legislator, it's very likely they might come back with that. So I just wanted to bring that up. That might be something we might expect someone to say, but this is all.
We will be happy to drop that talking point for you. Yeah.
And really, I really appreciate, and the talking points will be very important. And I really appreciate the comment that this, in effect, makes the BS factor permanent for a selected group of districts. And we've all been working, and our legislators have been great in reducing the BS factor. It was $1 billion 10 years ago, and now it's within sight, and now it's being made permanent. And that's not fair.
To echo your point, Superintendent Dorland, it would also be helpful in those talking points, what have we added to our plate over these years? We have added additional security. We have added, mental health issues and challenges that people are asking us or expecting us, right, to support. We put in the SELs, but we're also trying to find different ways to have access. Right. Right. So I'm thinking like there is that huge bucket of must-dos that we don't get funding for. It comes from someplace else. It comes from, what our kids should be having access to in the classrooms. Because if we can't pay for it with support from the state, it comes from the classroom. And so that goes back to the accountability. That goes back to what you're asking us to pay for to have great outcomes for children. But you're eating away at the body of it. We're basically consuming ourselves.
Yeah.
At the expense of our kids. And our staff.
Well, that's uplifting. So we'll work together to collectively, we as a strong we, to get those talking points and get some of those sort of, Dr. Varda, as you were saying, what can we anticipate in some of those conversations so that we're really well prepared? Because I think this is one of those moments that will demand a pivot in how we think about what resources we have. To your point, well, that's been made, that bucket of things that are expected and or mandated for us to do continues to rise. I mean, it's not like that's a shrinking set of things. And it's one of the reasons why when we talk about some of the criticisms of, well, we're just here to teach kids how to read, do math, and be literate in science. Like, okay, but that's not the expectation. That's not what our communities are expecting. That's not what our legislature is expecting. That's not what we're told we need to do. That is what we would love to be able to focus on. And it's just not, that's not the realistic set of expectations that we have as school districts anymore. And yeah, okay, that soapbox is probably worn out by now. Is there any other direction or help that we can provide to you directly as you move forward in helping us to advocate for some of these pieces in support of our district?
No, I appreciate all the help we can provide for all of the students and staff and community in Jeffco. I know that Lisa and I are already exchanging emails about coming up with the talking points, and so we will get right on that. And then I think everybody has my cell phone, and so text me, call me, whatever questions you have, and I will keep everybody updated through the superintendent's office.
And if any of you want me to be alongside you as you're having some of these conversations, I'm happy to clear things off my calendar and do that with you. So just let me know, and I'll come side by side with you as you might want.
Great. I do have a question about a bill specifically, and I don't know if other folks have that. So when we transition, but if we need to come back to this topic, obviously it's a big one, so we can always do that. I'm curious about SB 23-241, so the Office of School Safety bill. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the bill itself, and then I would be curious if, as a district, if folks have had a chance to review that, impacts to Jeffco, like would it interact, overlap? I'm not sure how, if that's really intended for districts that don't have their own internal safety and security office. I need more information about it.
Happy to talk about that. And in full disclosure, I do also work for the DeAngelis Center, and we have been supportive of that bill. In 2019, there was a state audit. This is 241. In 2019, there was a state audit that said they had 4 state agencies working on school safety issues, and they really ought to consolidate that just to help districts do more and be better served through one portal, if you will. This bill, sponsored by the Joint Budget Committee, has passed the House and the Senate. There's still some differences to work out. Would create that Office of School Safety within the Department of Public Safety. It got strong support. They are just working out the differences between the House and the Senate. I think it would provide more consistent leadership to all school districts. There are, again, per our earlier conversation, there are many rural districts and other districts that just don't have any expertise. They don't have law enforcement near their schools. They're lacking in all of those things. And there is a specific area of focus to help some of the rural school districts, help them apply for grants from the federal government. There are grants that are out there, but rural school districts just don't have the capacity to do that. I think this is a priority of the governor's office, and it received strong bipartisan support in both houses. And I'm sure it will get to the governor's office, probably get to the governor's desk for signature soon.
Are there any specifics you could share around, like, what are those points between House and Senate, the revisions that are being considered that are either sticky wickets or things that may be helpful to know as it gets amended?
I wish I could remember what the differences were. There was some increase in some grant funds, and there was a difference in the amount between the two houses. It wasn't, if I remember correctly, it wasn't substantive differences. Yeah.
So not changes where we'd be like, what? Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. That's helpful. Thank you. Are there other specific bills or other conversations? Director Parker?
As far as HB 231109, am I right? That's kind of been PI'd. It's not going any further this year?
Yes. House Bill 1109 that we talked about a lot at my last meeting about modifications to school policies and student conduct. This bill had a very lengthy hearing, went late into the evening, no action was taken. There weren't the votes to get it out of the committee, so the sponsor went back the day I sent you this report and said, please kill the bill. So that bill is not going forward. There has been a bill since I sent this update out that has been introduced that would modify when you could expel a student. It has more general language, not as comprehensive as this bill. It is really slimmed down version. So I'll include that in this week's report.
Okay. And then HB 231003. There's lots of interest in that bill. And so my question has to do around the way they handle students who are 12 and over, 12 years of age and over, and their ability to not want their parents to be notified of this screening, the mental health screening. Can you tell me why the age 12 and over is put into this bill?
This bill passed the House after a lengthy bit of debate, and I think that age limit was put into the bill to get it through the House.
But I guess what I don't understand is that that's the main point of contention for people testifying against it. They don't like the fact that any parents would not be advised that their student is getting the screening. So putting that in there, you're saying that there are some advocates there. I remember hearing that there's something else in statute that refers to kids who are 12 years and older.
Yes, and I may have to get back to you on that, and I can put it in this week's update, get you some more information on that, because this debate was about 2 months ago in the House, and I remember they modified it because it was generating too much controversy. But let me put it in this week's report.
Okay.
From my own children, I know that I lost access to their medical information when they were 12. Like in Colorado, we do have legislation that basically ensures medical privacy for children 12 and older. So I would imagine it has something to do with that.
Okay.
So maybe getting a reference to what that specifically is would be helpful to,
Yeah, and also along those lines, it does say that after screening, if the screener determines that the student is in need of additional services, once again, 12 years old and older, the students can say, I don't want my parents to know. I see in the bill, it does say if there's concern about safety and child neglect and abuse and whatever, you report it. But I'm just wondering, are there any other circumstances where it didn't rise to that level? The student just said, I don't want my parents to know. How does the student go about getting the support that the screener said they need? So if you could find that out, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Questions on other bills or potential legislation and/or just a return to our previous conversation because there's more to add, which is fine too.
The one other bill I wanted to mention is House Bill 1241, the task force to study the K-12 accountability system, sponsored by Representative Byrd, who now has part of Jeffco, and Senator Zenzinger. There was an audit that was requested of the state accountability system. The audit came out last fall. The results of the audit pleased no one. It really was not very helpful. So this would establish a task force of about 25 people to really look at the accountability system, its relationship to academic achievement, where there are gaps in academic achievement and so on. It would require a interim report in about a year and a final report in a year and a half. Once the bill was discussed, it came out of Education, House Education, with very strong support of the districts, the support of the unions, support of the education reformers. So I'm not aware of anybody who's opposed to this bill at this point. It has a small fiscal note of about $250,000 for 1 year. I think it will get that money, and then I think this bill will probably move forward.
I'm eager to see it move forward. I mean, I know that the superintendent is having conversations among the Denver Metro Superintendent's group. I'm participating in a group that's looking at some of these accountability system changes. So that should be a lively conversation if that moves forward and that task force is seated to really understand, not just connected to what we were talking about before with what's going into systems and what's expected to come out, but then what is the real function and purpose of an accountability system that really works for all districts and kids. Ultimately, that's what we're here for. So thank you for bringing that one up. Are there any others that you wanted to bring to our attention or highlight or that you feel are, on fire?
You mentioned last time House Bill 1198 about the teacher externship program. That bill just hasn't moved forward, and the price tag of $540,000, basically $500,000, maybe what's holding it up. So, well, I think a lot of people would think that's a good thing. It's just a price tag, and again, one more grant program, one more kind of one-off in the K-12 world, maybe holding that one up.
I don't have it open in front of me. Is that Brenna Titone?
Yes.
Bill? Okay,
Yes.
Just want to make sure I was connecting it with the right thing. So in your estimation, that would be the cost? Okay. Other questions, comments, or direction, I guess, for Mr. Bowditch before he leaves us? Okay, great. Well, we'll get to work on our part of communicating with our colleagues in the legislature. And if there are other points or things that come up, we appreciate all the advocacy you do and keeping us informed as they move forward.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks to the staff and everybody, and to Brenna, who's always been very helpful. And
Yeah.
she certainly deserves time off.
That's right. Hopefully she is not listening to this.
Yeah, I hope not.
She's just ignoring everything that's happening
Yes.
here.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Have a great evening. All right. So the board is going to take a break and reconvene publicly by 6 p.m. Am I wrong? Oh, okay. Sorry. I was trying to read a look. Oh, it was that was an active listening voice or face. Okay. Reconvene by 6 p.m. An executive session has been noticed pursuant to 24-6-402, Section 4B, to receive legal advice. So we will convene? No. We will adjourn, that's the other word, for right now. And then I'm going to have Ms. Tillison tell me what I missed.
You will need a motion to go into executives.
Okay, I was, great. Okay, yep. I thought we did that when we got back from
No, because we're going
dinner.
to do the executive session during your time away.
Ms. Sabah is nodding at me because she told me this already, and I forgot. All right. Is there a motion for the Board of Education to convene an executive session?
I move to convene an executive session under CRS 24-6-402 4B and E to receive legal advice regarding an arbitration decision and pending charter applications, and to confer with staff regarding collective bargaining negotiations.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right. It has been moved and seconded that the Board of Education will convene an executive session. Roll call, please, Ms. Zavada.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Ms. Reed,
Yes.
Ms. Schooley,
Yes.
Dr. Varda.
Yes.
All right, the board will now convene an executive session, which is closed to the general public, and we will reconvene in open session by 6 p.m. Got it. Thank you all.